We think it's best you step away for now. That was the group message my parents sent me. No explanation, no conversation, just a public dismissal. My aunt reacted with a thumbs up emoji, as if erasing someone from the family was something to applaud. I sat there staring at my phone, heart pounding, before I typed back, "Understood. I'll respect that. And I'll step away from the family fund too." That night, I quietly closed my $4.8 million contribution. By 2:15 a.m., my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. By sunrise, I had 89 missed calls and a voicemail from my father in full panic. "What happened? The bank flagged everything." I simply replied, "I'm honoring your decision." What they didn't know was I had spent years preparing for this moment, and when the family tried to push me out, they accidentally pushed me straight into power. I was born into the Monroe dynasty, not a royal one, but close enough in Philadelphia's financial world. 3 generations of wealth managers, real estate moguls, and investment sharks. To outsiders, we were power in pinstripes. To insiders, we were power built on politics, pressure, and pride. From the time I could read, I was taught how to scan stock charts before bedtime. While other kids watched cartoons, I was sitting at my father's elbow as he calculated projected yields. I didn't mind. I loved the numbers. I loved the challenge. I loved being part of something bigger. But what I didn't realize was, no matter how sharp I became, I would never be truly seen. At Stanford, I graduated early with a double major in quantitative economics and computer science. I turned down high-paying offers on Wall Street to come home and join Monroe Asset Group, the family firm. I was 24, full of ideas and optimism, thinking I'd be welcomed as a successor in the making. Instead, I was placed under my cousin Reed, a man who barely passed his finance classes and spent more time at golf courses than the trading desk. "He's been here longer," my father said, patting my arm. "You'll learn how we do things." Reed had been there 8 months longer. Over the next 7 years, I generated strategy reports that outperformed every other team. My algorithmic investment models were pushing returns 8–12% above market benchmarks. But in meetings, Reed presented my findings with a smug smile, like he'd done the work himself. My father always nodded in approval, never once calling it out. It was like my value only existed in the shadows, useful, but not credited, present, but never central. The most infuriating part wasn't the lack of recognition. It was the patronizing tone they used to explain basic principles I'd already mastered in grad school. My uncle said I overcomplicated things. My Aunt Georgia once leaned in and said, "Honey, men don't like women who seem too sharp. Let them feel needed." I learned to nod and smile. I learned to shrink my language. I learned to translate brilliance into simplicity so it wouldn't bruise their egos. But behind the silence, I was building something else, something of my own. While the rest of them were busy acquiring beach houses or arguing over legacy portfolios, I was pouring weekends into side ventures, developing proprietary algorithms, and mentoring founders of fintech startups. I told no one. I didn't need their validation. I didn't even need their money. Still, a part of me held on to hope that one day they'd look at me and say, "We were wrong. You belong at the head of the table." That day never came. Instead, what came was a group message, 7 words that would unravel everything I thought I owed them. "We think it's best you step away for now." And with that, the story didn't end. It began. It was a Tuesday. I had just finished reviewing a proposal from a mid-sized medical tech firm I'd been quietly funding through my independent investment group. I was sipping coffee in my home office, a space I had carved out inside the brownstone I bought under an LLC, when the message came in. Family strategy chat. "Dad, we've discussed this at length. We think it's best you step away for now." No call, no meeting, no forewarning, just a 7-word execution via WhatsApp. I stared at the screen. A dull buzzing filled my ears. Then came the second blow. Aunt Georgia, the one who always smiled at me in public but whispered behind closed doors, reacted with the AGA. Like I had been deleted from a Google Doc. For a moment, I froze. My pulse stayed calm, but my chest burned, not from surprise, but from clarity. This wasn't just professional exclusion. This was a line crossed. I replied with the same cold politeness they had shown me. "Understood, I'll respect that, and step away from the family fund as well." Not a single response followed, not even a confused emoji. You see, the family fund wasn't some symbolic account. It was a $13.5 million pooled investment vehicle that supported everything from real estate ventures to seasonal luxury trips. Each core family member contributed based on income, but few understood it like I did. I had personally grown my share to over $4.8 million, nearly 36% of the total, through compounding returns, strategic positioning, and yes, actual work. I wasn't just a contributor. I was the driver behind its growth. That night, while the rest of the family was probably celebrating their little power move over martinis and ignorance, I logged into the fund's back-end portal. As one of 3 official administrators, I had full visibility and transactional authority. I downloaded the performance logs I'd built, exported my personal allocation history, verified the liquidity status 57% available in short-term assets. Then I initiated the transfer. Withdraw, full contribution plus, allocated growth. Total, 521,480. Confirmation required, yes. I clicked confirm. The system pinged, emails auto-fired. Alerts went out to the secondary administrators, probably my father and uncle who wouldn't see them until morning. I didn't feel rage. I felt surgical focus. Years of silent dismissal were condensing into one decisive act. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed. At 2:15 a.m., it started. Buzz, buzz, buzz. I blinked awake to the screen lighting up beside me. 17 missed calls, then 22, then 35. By sunrise, I had 89 missed calls, 127 messages, and a blinking voicemail notification. I brewed my coffee, sat by the window, and finally pressed play on the first voicemail. Evelyn, it's your father. What the hell happened? The bank flagged everything. The fund is frozen. You need to call me back immediately. I smiled, just slightly. Then I typed back 4 simple words. I'm honoring your decision. It wasn't revenge. It was alignment. They told me to step away. I had. They just didn't know how far I'd already walked. By the time the sun peeked through the Boston skyline, my phone looked like a nuclear dashboard. 89 missed calls. 43 WhatsApp messages. 17 voicemails. 3 urgent emails from the family's legal team. The first was panic. The second, predictable blame. The third would come cloaked as reconciliation. I didn't check any of it right away. Instead, I made eggs, toasted sourdough, poured fresh orange juice, sat on the balcony, let the silence sink in like sunlight on skin. Then, with quiet precision, I opened the voicemails. Evelyn, this is completely unacceptable. Whatever point you're trying to make, this isn't the way. You've jeopardized the entire fund. Do you realize what you've done? You need to undo this, now. But the one that stayed with me wasn't angry, it was fragile. Evelyn, I don't understand what's happening. Whatever we did, this seems extreme. The fund is frozen. The bank says they need your verification to unfreeze it. Please call me back, please. That was my father, Robert Monroe, a man who once said, "We never beg, we negotiate." And now he was doing both. I replied with a single text. I'm honoring your decision. You asked me to step away. I have. The withdrawal was made in accordance with Section 7.3 of the fund agreement. I've submitted documentation to the bank. Within 30 seconds, my phone rang again. I declined. And then followed it with, I'll be available Monday at 9 a.m. at my home office. Address has been emailed. Then I turned off notifications. You see, the family fund was structured on trust, not foresight. We always kept 50-60% of it in liquid form to jump on sudden investment opportunities. But pulling out 36% at once? It broke the structure. The fund wasn't bankrupt. It was paralyzed. Locked, pending verification. And none of them could touch it without me. I didn't do it to hurt them. I did it to remind them. They had spent years talking about the family name, about legacy, about doing things the Monroe way. But all those things only mattered as long as I kept playing my assigned role smart enough to work, quiet enough to never challenge. They didn't think I'd actually step away. They forgot I was the one who built the tools they relied on. The one who sat in meetings taking notes while others took credit. The one who read every contract, especially the clauses that allowed voluntary exits with full pro rata withdrawal. They forgot I was watching and documenting. So while they scrambled, I did something radical. I made tea, lit a candle, watched the messages roll in like waves crashing against a cliff that would not move. Around 3 p.m., the family group chat exploded. Uncle Drew, this is sabotage. Aunt Georgia, she's too emotional for this line of work. Cousin Reed, what about the Cambridge deal? We needed that liquidity. Mom, Evie, sweetheart, we need to talk. The tides were turning. From blame to fear to desperation. And I hadn't even revealed the real storm yet. Because while they were panicking about a 6.5M withdrawal, they had no idea about what I'd built outside their walls. No idea that for the past 4 years, I'd been laying the foundation for my own empire. A quiet one. Independent. Bulletproof. And now, it was almost time to show them exactly who they'd tried to erase. They thought I was just being dramatic. That I was throwing a tantrum because I got my feelings hurt. But tantrums don't take 4 years to plan. Tantrums don't involve LLCs, patents, equity shares, and client retention clauses. No. This wasn't a tantrum. It was a transition from being ignored to being inevitable. 4 years ago, after yet another family meeting where my risk model was brushed aside so Reed could pitch gut feel investments over scotch, I went home and opened a blank document. Title: M Capital, Phase I. That was the moment it began. While they spent weekends at the lake house or took 3-week trips to Florence, I built. I founded a boutique advisory firm under the name EMC Holdings, registering it as a fully separate entity. Everything was done legally, quietly, ethically. I never solicited Monroe clients. Never used family resources. I even worked through holidays. I found my first 2 clients through a Stanford professor's referral. Then 4 more through word of mouth. Then came the angels, the founders, the retired athletes, the tech execs who didn't want loud advisors in glass towers, they wanted results. By year 2, I was managing $78 million in diversified portfolios. By year 3, $240 million. And by year 4 last quarter, my firm quietly surpassed $410 million in assets under management. And here's the thing, I didn't just manage money. I own the process. I built 3 proprietary algorithms, 2 of which are now patented, that allow real-time tax efficiency, optimization, and adaptive rebalancing based on geopolitical events. Boring to most. Game-changing to the people who matter. And every single intellectual property filing filed under my name, not Monroe's. I paid out of pocket for every developer I hired. Drafted my own operating agreement. Had a compliance lawyer vet every contract. And I kept my operations small, agile, and airtight. Meanwhile, at Monroe Asset Group, they were still using spreadsheets built on templates I created 8 years ago. That Saturday evening, while group chat notifications buzzed like angry wasps, I opened my secure drive and reviewed my folder labeled Exit Strategy, Active. Inside were signed client agreements with personal service clauses, certificates of incorporation for all my private holdings, patent registration documents, performance reports comparing EMC versus Monroe for the last 12 quarters, screenshots of Monroe family messages, minutes, and emails that consistently credited others for my work. I wasn't preparing for war. I was preparing for proof. Proof that if they came for me legally, emotionally, reputationally, I could meet them on every battlefield. And win. At 9:47 p.m., Amanda, my younger cousin, and the only family member who ever really saw me, messaged privately. Amanda, I just heard what happened. Honestly, good for you. They've been taking you for granted for years. If you ever want to talk, I'd love to grab coffee. You inspire me. I stared at her message longer than I should have. Then I typed back one word. Yes. That word, that one connection, reminded me that this wasn't just about taking power back. It was about creating a model for how to take it back. Not through screaming. Not through begging. Through structure, logic, boundaries, ownership. And come Monday, I wasn't going to show up angry. I was going to show up with a balance sheet. Monday, 8:52 a.m. The knock came earlier than expected. I had set the meeting for 9:00 sharp, but, of course, the Monroe family always liked to show up early when they were desperate and late when they were in power. I checked the screen on my home security panel. Standing outside were my father, Uncle Drew, Aunt Georgia, Reed, and Jonathan, the family's longtime attorney. They looked like a board of directors dressed for an ambush. Except this time, the boardroom was my brownstone. and I was the one holding the gavel. I opened the door, calm and unreadable. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They hesitated just slightly, taking in the sleek interior, the curated artwork, the quiet confidence of my space. They had never been invited here. I watched the subtle shift in their eyes. For once, they were on unfamiliar ground. I had arranged my dining room like a conference suite. 8 chairs, a pitcher of filtered water, a tray of pastries, fresh coffee. Professional. Controlled. Unmistakably mine. As they took their seats, I remained standing at the head of the table. My father noticed, of course. His lips pressed together, but he said nothing. "We're here to resolve the situation regarding the fund," he began. I held up a hand, the same gesture he had used to silence me in meetings for years. "We'll get to that," I said. "But first, let's clarify where we are." I reached down and passed each of them a printed document. Title: Fund Withdrawal. Legal basis and timeline. Withdrawal initiated 11:14 p.m. Friday. Clause: Section 7.3 Family Fund Agreement. Amount: $6,521,480. Status: verified, initiated, in compliance. Result: fund frozen under bank protocol pending clarification. Jonathan skimmed the document, eyes narrowing. Everything checks out. My father leaned forward. "The Henderson deal collapses at noon if we don't replace the down payment." "Then let's talk solutions," I replied, sliding another folder across the table. Inside was a simple 2-page term sheet. Loan agreement. EM Capital to Monroe Family Fund. Amount: $5 million. Interest: 6.75% annualized. Term: 18 months. Collateral: secured against asset returns. Clause: no board involvement or managerial oversight by Evelyn required. "A loan?" Uncle Drew barked. "You're going to charge your own family interest?" "This is a business transaction," I said evenly. "That's how we've always done things at Monroe, haven't we?" Aunt Georgia tried to soften her voice. "Sweetheart, don't you think this is a little harsh?" I turned to her. "You gave a thumbs up when I was pushed out of the family." She said nothing. Jonathan cleared his throat. "Frankly, these terms are generous given the circumstances. Any external lender would demand double the rate and a larger stake." My father stared at me. I could almost see the math running in his mind. Pride versus need. Ego versus collapse. Finally, he nodded. "Fine, we'll take the loan." I raised a finger. "With one more condition." Everyone tensed. "I don't want an apology. I don't want a seat at the old table." I leaned in. "I want my own table." I opened the final folder. Proposal: Monroe Capital, a new division. Evelyn Monroe as CEO. Full strategic autonomy. Direct profit share model. Voting rights tied to contribution percentage. No interference from traditional Monroe board members. "You get the money," I said. "I get independence and structural power, not symbolic respect." The room went silent. My father looked at the proposal, then back at me. "You've already prepared all this." "I've been preparing for years," I said. Uncle Drew muttered something about betrayal. Reed looked like he wanted to speak, but thought better of it. Jonathan looked at my father. "Legally, this is sound. And from a survival standpoint, it's smart." My father's voice dropped. "I underestimated you." I didn't smile. "You trained me not to need your approval." I listened. And with that, he signed. As soon as my father signed the loan agreement, the tension in the room shifted from defiance to disorientation. They thought that was it. That the deal was the climax. They had no idea. I stood and picked up a small black remote from the sideboard. "There's one more thing before we finalize." I pressed the button. The large TV mounted on my dining room wall flickered to life. Slide 1. Heather Monroe Capital 4-year performance overview. Logo sharp. Fonts clean. Graphs undeniable. I watched their bodies shift slightly, a straightening of backs, a tightening of jaws. My father blinked. "You've been running another firm?" "Yes," I said, "for 4 years, registered as EM Capital Holdings, fully licensed, fully compliant." Next slide. Total assets under management. 421 million. Client retention rate. 98.4%. Average ROI, last 8 quarters, 17.1%. Jonathan leaned forward. That's impressive. Thanks, I replied without a smile. Next slide. Clients. 27 high net worth individuals and small institutional portfolios. None of them were Monroe clients. I had made sure of that. I turned to the table. I never poached, never violated any agreements, but I built this because I knew no matter what I contributed, I would never be given the space to lead. Uncle Drew crossed his arms. You still work for Monroe. This is competition. Incorrect, I said flatly. My employment contract explicitly allowed for personal investment activity, as long as it didn't solicit Monroe clients or use company resources. I followed that clause to the letter. I walked around the table and dropped printed copies of that contract clause in front of them. Jonathan read it, nodded slowly. It holds. She's in the clear. Slide 4. Registered patents EM financial algorithms A, B, and C. Each with patent numbers, filed dates, and approval status. These were developed using my own equipment, my own funds, on my own time, I said. Every document has timestamps, resource logs, and legal counsel attached. These belong to me. Aunt Georgia scoffed. You think some software patents make you indispensable? I clicked again. Slide 5. Client contracts personal service clauses. List of 17 Monroe clients who had signed specific agreements to work with me, not the firm, including a clause that allowed them to transfer their accounts should I ever leave. Reed muttered, You're bluffing. I tossed a folder to Jonathan. Original contracts, scanned and certified. Jonathan's eyebrows rose. She's not bluffing. My father's voice quieter now. How many? I met his eyes. Approximately $230 million in assets, over half your core portfolio. Silence. Not even a chair creaked. I could almost hear the realization land. I wasn't asking to be taken seriously. I was forcing them to. Slide 6. EMC versus Monroe. Comparative performance. Over 4 years. 2 bars. Mine was double the height and rising. I'm not sharing this to gloat, I said finally. I'm sharing it because for years, I was told I was difficult, too ambitious, too technical, too much. I paused. But clearly I wasn't too much. I was just in the wrong room. No one responded, not even Reed. They weren't just shocked, they were stunned into silence by data. Let me be clear, I continued. This presentation isn't about hurting Monroe. It's about establishing a fact. I bring value. And from this point on, I expect to be treated accordingly, not as a burden, but as a force. My father exhaled slowly. You built all this? Quietly? Strategically, I corrected. He nodded. You've made your point. No, I said. I've made my position. They left my brownstone that morning like executives exiting a hostile merger, subdued, shaken, recalibrating. No hugs. No thanks. Just signed contracts, stunned expressions, and a reality none of them had prepared for. For the first time, they were no longer managing me, they were reacting to me. And I wasn't done yet. Over the next week, emails began trickling in from Jonathan. Polite, strategic, clearly not written on his own terms. Your father would like to discuss a new leadership structure. Uncle Drew has expressed interest in exploring updated governance frameworks. There's talk of creating a new division, fully autonomous under your oversight. I didn't reply right away. I gave them space to sweat, to draft, to argue, to realize they didn't just need my money. They needed my mind. When I finally agreed to a second meeting, this time at a neutral location, a quiet conference room at a private club downtown, they arrived looking different. Not just in suits, but in postures. Less entitled, more careful, like they were approaching a peer, not a daughter. Jonathan began. We'd like to formally propose the creation of a new entity within the family structure, Monroe Capital Partners. You would be named President and CEO, with full strategic authority and performance-based compensation. He slid the folders across the table. I opened them. Key terms: 30% ownership stake. Voting rights tied to financial contribution. Full control over hiring, investment strategy, and client relations. Independence from the Monroe Family Board. I kept my face neutral. But inside, I was counting every unspoken concession. My father finally spoke. We've also updated the family fund agreement. From now on, voting rights will be proportional to financial input. No more equal weight decisions regardless of effort. That, I admit, made me pause. Because it wasn't just a change in structure. It was an admission. The system had always been rigged and they knew it. What about my existing business? I asked. We propose a merger, Jonathan said smoothly. Your clients, your patents, your technology all retained under a substructure within Monroe Capital, legally distinct but financially integrated. And succession? I pressed. What happens when someone else tries to override me again? Jonathan opened a separate document. Merit-based succession policy. Leadership transitions determined by audited performance, not seniority or family status. My fingers tapped the table slowly. Not out of hesitation, out of deliberation. I glanced around the room. My father's jaw was tense but not clenched. Aunt Georgia was silent for once. Reed looked like someone had made him swallow a brick. Then a voice I hadn't expected spoke up. Amanda. She had joined them quietly, sitting at the far end of the table. This was her first time being invited to a meeting not as a note-taker, but as a participant. I just want to say, she began. What Evelyn did, it wasn't betrayal. It was clarity. It helped me see what we all pretend not to see. She turned to me. I've applied for a design fellowship in Chicago. I'm leaving next quarter. You gave me the courage to even imagine that. I swallowed hard. For a moment, none of this was about finance. It was about something bigger, what it meant to break free and still build. I closed the folder and looked at my father. You once told me legacy was about reputation. He nodded cautiously. You were wrong, I said gently. Legacy is about structures that outlast personalities. This new model, it's not just better for me. It's better for all of us. He didn't argue. He just said, so, we have a deal? I nodded. Pending one final review with my legal team. The agreement was finalized 2 weeks later. Not rushed, not cornered, but negotiated on my terms. Monroe Capital Partners was born. Not as an offshoot of the old empire, but as its quiet evolution. And I was its first CEO. In the early days, there were hiccups. Reed would still forget to copy me on internal updates. Aunt Georgia tried inserting herself into branding decisions. Uncle Drew made one snide remark about Evelyn's little algorithm cult in a stakeholder call. But the difference now? There were consequences. Our governance structure was tight. Board minutes were recorded. Performance was tracked by third-party auditors. And I had the one thing they never expected: leverage and the will to use it. Our first quarter? We outperformed every other division by 22%. Old clients came back not because we asked, but because they followed the results. New clients arrived, drawn by something fresher than pedigree, transparency, agility, and proof. Even industry press began to notice. The quiet rise of Monroe Capital, led by the daughter once dismissed. I didn't give interviews. I didn't need to. My numbers spoke louder than legacy ever could. Amanda left for Chicago that spring. Before she boarded her train, she handed me a sketch, an office design concept. Modern, light-filled, grounded by oak textures, and a single phrase etched across the conference room glass. If they won't give you a seat at the table, build your own. I framed it and hung it in our new HQ downtown. Her firm launched 6 months later with my personal seed investment and full branding credit under her name. Things shifted at home, too. Not overnight, but in subtle, meaningful ways. My mother started calling more, not to ask, but to ask how I was doing. My father stopped interrupting me in meetings. At one particularly quiet dinner, he set his fork down and said, without looking up, I've been thinking about your grandfather. He once told me, preserve what works, but don't fear what doesn't. I think I finally understand what he meant. I didn't say much, just nodded. Because we both knew that sometimes, what doesn't work is a family system. And changing it is the most radical form of loyalty. I never moved back into the core Monroe board. I didn't want to. Power wasn't the seat at the old table, it was having the choice to walk away from it. I chose growth over permission. And for the first time in my life, they didn't see that as rebellion. They saw it as leadership. A year later, I stood on the balcony of our new building, overlooking the city where I had once been overlooked, and I thought about that group message. 7 words that tried to erase me. We think it's best you step away for now. They thought they were dismissing me. They were actually freeing me. They thought they were punishing me. They were provoking everything I had been too patient to unleash. I didn't step away from the family. I stepped into who I'd been building all along. And that, in the end, is the real inheritance. As someone who grew up respecting legacy, structure, and the family way, I understand how hard it is to challenge the system you were raised to protect. But this experience taught me something I wish I had learned earlier. Silence doesn't equal loyalty, and tradition means nothing if it devalues the people upholding it. To anyone older watching this, parents, aunts, uncles, even grandparents, I ask you, when was the last time you truly saw the younger members of your family as leaders, not just as helpers? Sometimes, the strongest thing we can do as elders is to step back and listen. Because if we don't offer space, respect, or agency, we may end up forcing the very people we love to walk away, not out of rebellion, but out of survival. I didn't destroy my family. I made them evolve. And in doing so, I evolved too. If this story moved you, please subscribe, leave a comment, and share your thoughts. Have you ever been pushed aside or realized too late you were pushing someone else away? Let's talk about it. Your voice matters.